All right, everybody, welcome back to the Tropical MBA podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, boss man.
Here we are, back in this beautiful city, and unfortunately, we are the worst looking people in the whole town.
Yeah, that's
Good to be among the greats, though, isn't it?
It's fantastic. It's been particularly exciting meeting with listeners. In fact, today's episode was inspired by a listener conversation. Last weekend, there was a chapter event in Lyon. There's a great event coming up in London. We're hosting a bunch of DCers here in Barcelona in just a few weeks. So it's just cool across the DC community to see so many people using the summer to get on a plane, meet up with other entrepreneurs and talk about, hey, what's 2025 going to look like for the business? Because earlier in the year, there's a lot of uncertainty going on, a lot of shakeups, things changing with SEO, tariffs, elections, all kinds of stuff. And I feel like the dust has settled for a lot of founders, and we're locked back in and sort of figuring out what kind of year 2025 is going to be for our businesses. And we want to talk about that a little bit today with the concept of growth versus optimization. So when most of us talk about growth, we talk about channel expansion. It's kind of a common way to think about it. Like, I've tapped out a channel, going to figure out what the next one is. But we tend to peter out when our personal networks or that original channel that we started the business with peters out, saturates, or changes. So what we want to talk about today is a potential systematic way we can find the 10% of activities that lead to 90% of growth. So this actually all came about. We were down on the beach and Jesse Schoberg, who's been on the show, showed up. We were hanging out with him. He's such a smart guy. And he said, Dan, I've started to think that I categorize every task in my business as either growth or optimization. And I picked away at it a little bit. And it turned out to be a really interesting discussion about what really is growth, or a lot of the things that we're calling growth really optimizations. If we use this framework, does it affect the way the team talks? Does it affect the way people behave? And it seems like it's got a lot of potential. And so I texted him after and I was like, I need to dig into this a little bit more. So he sent me the source material, the book that gave him the concept. And so we're going to talk about it here today. So shout out Jesse Schoberg. By the way, I was bugging him to come on the podcast. So hopefully he'll come on the show.
That's
here.
The problem with hanging out with you, by the way. It's always at the end of the conversation. So you want to come on the podcast? It's like, man, I was just trying to hang out.
That's how I do
to talk business. Why's it got to be broadcasted?
Every founder's been there where whatever your original channel was, or that original personal network, the way you first got customers, or the way you got that second set of customers, when it just runs out, what do? We often talk about channel experiments. Well, I got my first set of customers this way, so now it's got to be this social media platform or this sales technique or whatever. And what we want to talk about today is dig a little deeper into that and how we might systematically think about growth levers. It's something we're thinking about. I know it's something a lot of listeners are thinking about. So we'll get to that in a minute. At the top, what I wanted to talk about was optimization, not growth. Because part of the problem is if you're not optimized in terms of your operation, if you're not delivering for your customers, it's really hard to peel away and to figure out growth. Especially because one of the tensions between optimization and growth is you kind of always know that optimization will work. If you spend your energy and your investment on making your business better, the hit rate is pretty high. But if you do the same amount of investment on growth, you often fail. And so I think it's why almost everybody psychologically starts to trend towards optimization, and it can get even more difficult as the revenue numbers go up. How can we successfully optimize without having optimization creep? If you're just making things better in the business, that falls under the category of optimization.
Yeah.
Growth typically is going to break some critical logic. And for a lot of team members, it's going to make their jobs harder, potentially. For the founder, maybe too. Also, in order to do growth, you will often be wrong, so you have to fail a lot. And most people, including founders, want to do a good job. And I think that's why it's hard to continually recapture a growth task. Anyway, let's talk about some optimization wins here at the top so we can clear the table, focus a little bit more on growth. We got an email from a listener, and I want to read it now. Hey, Dan, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to share a quick win with you. I onboarded a new team member last week, and we're still running those daily huddles. Honestly, these huddles have been a game changer, especially for new hires. They help everyone stay aligned and confident. Here's the cool part. Another thing I picked up from the show is scorecards. This was my first time using one from day one. After giving my new team member a week to settle in, we reviewed the scorecard together, and I explained that it's a way for both of us to keep expectations clear and measurable. And here was the response from her new team member. I appreciate the scorecard. It's giving me a clearer understanding of my role and what the company expects of me. It's helping me to understand how I can contribute meaningfully and succeed in this position. So, boom, another win for simple operations and creating this seal where if you're a founder without a leadership team, how can you successfully meet your company goals without spending 40 hours a week operating? How do you seal yourself off from the operations for the majority of the week? And daily huddles and scorecards are two ways to do that.
Yeah, we picked up the Daily Huddle from Vern Harnish. Basically, if you haven't heard about it before, is like a quick meeting with your team where you basically let everybody know what you're working on for that day and what your main obstacles are. So it's a way to get visibility in the whole company from your desk, to have everybody kind of on the same page. And the idea there for us, at least, was we started to have the situation where we had a bunch of meetings in the company,
Right.
every day, 2 or 3 hour-long meetings.
Functional meetings.
Yeah, functional meetings. And we basically solved that with these daily huddles.
My frustration with the functional meetings is there would be a marketing meeting that was an hour on next Thursday. And then people wouldn't do any marketing work until the meeting.
Correct.
And then they would do the marketing work a little bit on the meeting. So it just slowed down the operation where ideally you should have someone who's in charge of a particular marketing project and they should be making meaningful progress on it every day if that project's a priority. And they shouldn't be doing any of the work in meetings.
Correct. And so for us, that basically got solved.
We're being realistic here. We're all small business owners. There's only so much time in the day to do all this optimizations. Some of our team members right now actually don't have scorecards because they're being effective. They understand what they're doing. So you can use these toolkits to taste. You don't have to sit there for 6 months and put this beautiful operation in place to manage a small amount of new revenue or whatever. You use them as you need them. They're just tools to spend the minority of your week managing the operation.
We haven't mentioned over optimization, but this is an area where you could easily over optimize.
Oh, yeah.
So it's you do everything but sell people new things.
You hire a consultant to bring in one of these systems into your company and you spend 6 to 12 months implementing that system. And it's overkill for most of us. So what I want to do is break down the TMBA guide to managing your operation in 5 hours or less a week. And of course, it's going to take some time to put this stuff into place, but we've laid this out a few times. I just wanted to revisit the idea because these are the key things that work for us right now.
And you keep saying minimize your operations down to 5 hours a week. That's not necessarily possible. We have a full-time operation person. Their job isn't to minimize operations. They do operations.
Correct.
For 40 hours a week. But what we're talking about here is you minimizing, as a business owner, your involvement in the operations as little as possible, right? So you can do the other thing that we're going to talk about in this episode, which is growth, because it's almost impossible to hire for that, especially in these types of businesses this early on.
If you have a methodology for hiring people in sub $5 million businesses that dramatically grow your business, we're all ears. We want to hear that because that does seem to be the pickle, that growth falls back onto the founder in smaller businesses. And so what we want to do is simplify the operation so that we can get as much time on those experiments as possible. Now you can commandeer your team into the growth experiments, but that's challenging. We're going to talk about some of the reasons for that today. But I think it's easy for founders, and we can all raise our hands here, to just get sucked into optimization to focus on maintenance and delivery. Because as the business gets larger, seemingly these things get more complicated, and sometimes they do. We went to Vern Harnish's thing. We've read all these books. We've experimented with a bunch of different systems. We've boiled it down to 4. And this is a simple way to run a small lifestyle business. By small, I mean sub $5 million. So the 4 steps are: number 1, solid financials. That's it. You need to be able to close your books quickly every month. You need to be able to pull all the relevant product line data. You need to understand your business snapshot at a moment's notice. You need to be able to pull the numbers and understand what they're looking like. Number 2, you need a measured plan. You need to understand what your team's doing and focusing on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. And that revolves around a leading metric. So a leading metric is not what you're seeing on your P&L. A leading metric is what you and the team are optimizing for, like daily active users or number of referrals this week or number of sales calls booked. What is that leading metric that your plan is optimizing for? And if you're thinking, okay, measured plan, I could write out a big memo or have all this data. The simplest way to do this is to have a scoreboard. So the scoreboard is simply like when you show up to your huddle or your weekly team call or your monthly team call, what's the number? What number are you optimizing for that will reliably lead to growth of the company? The next bit is, okay, so you got your solid financials, your measured plan, then you got your scorecards, which is simply how does the plan resolve onto every person's plate? And the final piece is pulse meetings, like daily huddles to keep the momentum alive. Honestly, this sounds like a lot. It can be a little bit to set up. We have done half-day sessions on scorecards. So there is like nuances in each of this, but it's like the best thing to do is just start with this stuff. I've gotten so many emails from listeners that were just like the listener that wrote in us today. It's like, all right, you don't have your solid financials done yet. Just start with the daily meeting. Just get everybody cranking on a number that you know is going to lead to health in the company. And it really reduces the amount of time you spend in meetings, keeps everything on track, and makes your life easier as someone who's ultimately both responsible for the operation and the growth.
I'll give you an example. This last week in our company, we're talking about referrals. So first things first, what's our referral rate right now? You figure out what that number is in the organization. Okay, we figured it out. Relatively easy to get to. For some people, it might be harder, right? Then what do? Go to ChatGPT. What should the referral rate be, right? Like, what's the industry standard? One of our numbers through this exercise was like above industry standard. Well, let's not mess with that. Because a lot of times when you mess with those types of things, it's a problem. Try and optimize something else. So figure out what your numbers are. For us, it was like having an understanding of like what our metrics were, what they should be, and then starting to figure out what the things were that we wanted to change there, right? Measured plan. We need a plan to get these referrals or whatever it is for you. So it's like we got to write it down. And these are the parameters that it has to operate within.
And how can we conceptualize that in numbers in a way that those numbers are aligned with the customer's values as well?
Yeah, 100%. You can tweak and change the numbers and it can be in your favor or whatever, but if it's not within the customer's favor, then it's probably not going to be long-term sustainable for the organization.
So it's like value versus money. You don't want to just optimize short-term. This is the problem. This is why you don't show up every morning and look at your P&L on your daily huddle, because your P&L isn't necessarily aligned with customer value.
Right.
You know, that's like a longer topic, but you want to find a way, especially for high growth companies, where you can deliver tons of value to your clients without over harvesting in terms of making short-term profits at the expense of like a longer term sustainability.
You're probably going to have to go at it like 5 or 6 times until you figure out something that's going to work.
Right.
And like you said, it's not going to damage your reputation, screw up your customers, cost too much money, whatever it is. These measured plans, even though you write them down and they look good, like you still have to go out and test them.
Right.
So then comes in the scorecard, and that's like the person that's responsible for it.
Right. Which element of the plan are they responsible for?
A lot of these companies, like we're talking about sub $5 million lifestyle businesses, this could be like 2 or 3 people. Sometimes if you're listening to this show right now, you're a solopreneur, it's still worth thinking about yourself as these different people running the process. And then finally, the pulse meetings. So coming back, this is a lot of times where you're revisiting the measured plan. A lot of times these things take longer than you think, but then you come back, you figure out, hey, what worked, what didn't work, and then put together another plan and then rinse and repeat.
It sounds simple, and honestly, it is. Like, simple isn't necessarily easy, but it's solid financials, a measured plan, scorecards, and pulse meetings. At the very top level, it's like company health. And then it's like, what do we do here to drive customer value? That's your plan. And scorecards is like, who is responsible and are they capable? And then number 4, pulse meetings is like, how do we keep the energy and accountability going? So why are we talking about all these plans, scorecards, pulse meetings, solid financials? All this relates to optimization, your operation, delivering value to your clients. We're not talking about growth. Growth is ultimately creative, and there's like a singular element to it. It's dependent on an insight. the insight that everybody can relate to is like, what was that moment of creativity where you started your business? A few different data points came together and you're like,
Yeah.
that's it. Because of I can get customers this way and I can deliver this, that's it. And I think a lot of us find ourselves in, say, like a $300,000 business or like a $1 million business. There's these levels that come up where now all of a sudden you got all these customers and you got product in a warehouse or whatever's going on. And man, like I don't have any time to like figure out that next thing. And so that's why we're talking about these 4 operational principles or frameworks. We need to find the time to contend with this. We need to have creativity. We need to figure out a way to dig back in and figure out what that next growth element is going to be.
When we're talking about these optimizations, I'll make the argument that growth can be had in these optimizations within the operations. We're talking about this plan with the solid financials measure plan, scorecard, pulse meetings. Going back in there and figuring out how you can increase something by 5 or 10%. If you can do that across 5 or 10 things in your organization, you're going to see growth.
Yeah. And I would say that would typically be rare than like having a creative idea about a new product at a new price point or a new marketing approach or a new referral approach or whatever. But I do think you're right. I'll tell the story because like Eamon has told the story many times about AppSumo, that this is the way he describes their growth path. He implemented a similar system that was like scoreboard, green, yellow, red. Are we on track with our numbers? And because he built such a tight operational system, what he managed to do was speed up the cash flow cycle. And so once you map out your operation, like how does value get delivered? How does cash get in the bank? If you have it mapped out, then the concept is you just speed. How can we get it going faster at higher volumes? So yeah, I think that can happen as well.
We've been putting out the word that remote first recruiting is helping you hire in Latin America. Here's 2 success stories. The first from a founder who had a $2,000 a month budget. We found him 3 interviews in the first week. He had a hard time deciding which one to go with. One of them had a PhD. They all had relevant experience and incredible English skills. The thing he said to me, and he almost said it like sheepishly, like, these candidates are actually better than the candidates I was looking at in America previously. How about that? We recently helped a company hire in Argentina for just $25,000 a year, and we did it in 14 days. That is a client-facing, experienced English speaker. So if you're interested in getting started hiring in Latin America, just schedule a 15-minute call with our lead recruiter, Greg Valentine. He can get you started then and there. So you're just one 15-minute call away from your next great team member. Check them out over at remotefirstrecruiting.com.
Okay, so Ian, this brings me to, I told you, I wrote down the concept for this episode after talking to Jesse on the beach, and he was talking about optimization versus growth. And so I texted him, I'm like, where do you get that idea, man? And he said, we need to check out this book by Matt Lerner. It's called Growth Levers. So Matt worked at PayPal as an early partner. He ended up coming up with an idea that made PayPal an extra $100 million, which was like the original genesis of the book. And he's gone on to be a partner at 500 Startups, which is a VC firm. So he writes this book called Growth Levers and How to Find Them. And I think it's written for the startup crowd, but I do think there's some interesting frameworks that we could dig into as bootstrappers and maybe borrow some of these ideas. But the fundamental concept of the book is that 90% of your growth comes from 10% of the things you do. And that does seem to be the case. So what challenges does that prevent? If I'm in growth mode, if I want to grow the company, then probably I'm going to be doing a lot of things that fail. And I think that's why it's fundamentally so hard to get team members to come up with true breakthrough moments in the business, because team members don't want to fail. Like
Totally.
they fundamentally want to do a good job. Like the whole concept of the scorecard is to like meet the 10%, the 15%, the 20% growth rate. Whereas if you go on growth experiments for half a year, you could have like 0. It could not work. Psychologically, having a 10% success rate is really difficult. But it also reminds me of business ideas. For most of us, it's going to take 10 business ideas to get to one that works. And so we're used to this. Now the question is, when we have a successful business that's like paying for this location independent lifestyle, are we willing to go back to the woodshed and come up with more risky ideas that have the potential to catalyze even more growth?
We have the impulse to start something new. because you want to be on that growth spectrum. But the truth is, like, most of us don't, and us included, we don't exhaust our current business to where it should be exhausted to.
Right.
There's legit businesses where you can optimize until you're blue in the face and nothing happens. And maybe somebody listening has done that. And they're just like, look, like, this business ran its life cycle.
It's an is what it is.
It is what it is.
Let's dig into growth levers, some of the concepts in this book by Matt Lerner a little bit, because I think it'll appeal to a lot of bootstrappers. This like top level concept that 10% of your activities are going to lead to 90% of these breakthrough moments. Ultimately, what he advocates for is like a tight cycle of growth experiments and iteration and kind of the classic stuff you'd hear from the startup world. But here's like Ian and I's processing of like some of the things that jumped out. There's a 5-step process. Basically, do you fully understand your customer journey? What's stopping them from doing more? So what is the constraint in that journey? Can you define a North Star metric that you can optimize for to help them do more? That's not just revenue. That's number 3. Number 4, are you running customer interviews to understand real motivations? Not what they say, but real motivation. And a lot of this echoes of what Vern Harnish puts up on the screen at his CEO boot camps when he talks about the companies that broke through. They often have these unique psychological insights into the marketplace that isn't just, I was more popular on Facebook. And the reason that's important is because it's way more affordable and it's based on your own customer data, your own particular insight. It's harder to copy versus just going out and trying to outspend people or outwork people on platforms. The final piece is to run growth sprints. So maybe we can dig into like some of the highlights here. Back to like, do you fully understand your customer journey? And we do this with a lot of listeners that we speak with on the phone, whether it's coaching or at events or whatever. It's like doing a detailed forensic of how people become clients of your business. Like, what is their full decision-making process? What systems do they touch? And mapping it out specifically. Most founders haven't actually done this. And what's interesting is when you do it, you start to see like that you're not even optimized for it, that there's a lot of meat left on the bone. And we're often thinking in terms of channels versus the reality of how people became customers. It's not as simple as, well, like they went on Facebook and they saw it and then they became a client. The customer journey tends to be much more complicated and often like very specific to your business. If they resolve in your business because of a relationship you or somebody else has with them, how did that relationship come about? That is the way, that is the customer journey. When we think about growth experiments, bootstrappers will often think about channel. But I think when we're talking about mapping a customer journey, it's like actually for your customer, where did they make the decision? And this is, I think, what people online say, like, where does your customer live online?
Yep.
So it could be at a conference. It could be at a certain type of forum. It could be at a certain type of problem-solving environment. It could be they're trying to solve another problem, but then you're related to that somehow. So it's like, where is your customer existing when they're making decisions about your type of product? They could be at a competitor. If your business is based on your personal network, it's like, where are they meeting you? How does that situation come about? How often does it come about? What Matt is suggesting that we do is go from this perspective of just table stakes channel thinking to like actually mapping the journey. When people map the customer journey of how people show up, you've got this weird customer journey that you've just mapped. And on the other hand, you've got, I should post more on,
right.
you know?
It's completely misaligned. Oh, they found through a friend of a friend, or like all these people came through my existing relationships, but I'm going to start a TikTok account.
Exactly. So that is what I think Matt's pressing us to do is like, what does this journey actually look like? Sometimes that doesn't line up with one of the big internet companies that specializes on in ads. Number 2, what's stopping them from doing more? So it's basically like digging into the constraints of that system. And we talk about personal network a lot. A lot of times founders are just like, I can't meet any more people. If the customer journey is like, I go out and meet people, I'm a real estate agent or whatever, I'm just completely, I can't meet more people. Maybe you could start hosting events. Now you're going one to many with that unique customer journey. So what we want to do is map the customer journey and then figure out what the constraint in that particular journey is before we just start brainstorming channel ideas. The number 3 thing is defining that North Star metric that you're trying to optimize for growth. He really stresses in the book that, hey, revenue and profit, if you do that, you're going to misalign yourself with your clients.
Yep.
And you're going to screw up, because all of us can like make more revenue and profit in the short term if we do things that doesn't drive value. So that's like kind of anti-innovation to focus on like the bottom line when you're thinking about growth. The classic examples would be like for a SaaS, it would be like your daily active users, like are people engaging? For consulting, for a lot of us that do consulting, it's like clients who recommend the service within a particular time frame. If I can't measure that like X number of clients are immediately referring X number of clients, if you can optimize your business around that, you can get like a positive growth flywheel going.
So you have an e-commerce company that does a checkout widget with add-ons. So it's like total cart volume or like total cart value, right?
Mm-hmm. How fast do they come back to buy again?
And I think your point is a good one here, which aligns with the customer. If you can increase the cart value through your software, then your customer gets more revenue, then your customer is more likely to use you, to refer to you.
If you're creating a tool for e-commerce.
Correct. Like you're building a tool for e-commerce, like a checkout tool where like you help people upsell into more products. So like total cart revenue
for your customers.
Could be a North Star metric, because if you can align with your customers on that and as an organization, then they're going to be more likely to use you. Every time you do something in the tool that changes or improves that number, which then improves your customer's business, which then they in turn refer you to other people.
This can be like a breakthrough moment when you like figure out the key behavior that like your best customers make that precedes revenue, that then you can focus your team on and focus your growth experiments on.
It separates you from other companies maybe that don't have a North Star metric because they are only concerned with revenue and profit, right? And there's like plenty of these companies out there. That's probably okay in the short term, but in the long term, it might not be okay. Like you might get run over by somebody that has more money, can spend more, whatever it is.
Yeah. In a consulting business, as an example, like you could be running successfully for years and not be getting too many referrals because you haven't identified that that would be a leading indicator for true growth. What's the reason that people aren't referring that enough? Maybe they only think your consulting is a 7. It's like good enough for them to come back, but it's not good enough for them to tell a friend about it. But maybe if you just did X, Y, and Z, it wouldn't increase your delivery costs that much, but they would be much more willing to, refer your service. All right. So number 4, are you running customer interviews to understand real motivations? So this is like something we learned from Vern. He's like talking about the same thing, just from a different angle from Matt, which is like learning this concept of how to do a jobs to be done interview. But here's the key point that you need to take away is that typically when you interview your customers, they will misrepresent the reason that they bought your product. So you need to get around this and understand the job that they're hiring you to do. So we run a recruiting agency. You might think that they're hiring us to hire them a person, because that's what our website says. We will hire somebody for you. But actually the job in their mind is that they want to work less, or they're feeling stressed out or overwhelmed. There's typically going to be some other idea in their mind, or they don't want to hire a chief people officer.
Or they don't feel like they're good enough, or they have the skills to hire the right person, and they're worried they're going to make a mistake.
Yes, they want to prevent someone from churning out of their organization.
Yeah.
You want to uncover that job to be done so that you can optimize your business around it, because typically it's going to be a unique insight that only you can get from the market. And if you can optimize around that before others, you can experience a true growth lever. And that's basically the pitch that Matt has for us, is like understanding these unique customer insights. I'll give you one example from the book that I thought was really cool. There was an elderly couple who for years wanted to downsize into one of these like development retirement homes that was like on the beach and it was a cool house or whatever. But it's expensive, and they just drug their feet for years. And when they finally bought the product, when they did the customer interview, the reason they said is, we decided it was in a good location and it was at the right price and we were ready to retire. So they do a jobs to be done interview with the couple. And the way you do these interviews, you could Google like how to do a jobs to be done interview. You're trying to get them to tell a story and connect with the emotions that they had, the psychology, the real reason they were, quote, hiring the house. And you say, it was a very reasonable decision for us to do this. Jobs to be done says, purchases aren't that reasonable. We want to dig into the psychology as founders so we can grow our businesses. Okay, get the whole setup. So they're like, we actually decided when we were at a diner one morning. They're literally telling the whole story of the purchase decision, the customer journey. They turned out to be wearing suit at the diner. It's kind of strange to be wearing a suit at a diner. Why were you wearing a suit at a diner? Well, I just came back from a funeral.
Mm-hmm. Trigger moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, interesting. One of our friends had died and we realized that like life is pretty short. And so we might as well take action on our plans. So they do these customer interviews. They get this key piece of psychology. Life is short. Buy your retirement home. And guess where they put the ads? In the obituary section of the newspaper. And in the book, Matt has a funny passage about, I bet you think this was just like a little tactic and it's cute and great story and everything. The numbers, the business grew. It was a dramatic change for the business. They had figured out this one key piece of psychology. Life is short. Buy a retirement home. We're going to advertise in the obituaries. And I love that story because I do feel like you were talking about digging into your current customers. There are what Vern Harnish would call these like psychological gems to be uncovered about why people want to be involved, why they want to hire your product. If you can discover that, potentially you can distribute that message, which is much more narrow and much more focused, much more affordably. So that's like the math behind this whole thing is, well, in theory, if you had a well-capitalized operation, super expensive product, big LTV, you can like out advertise everybody. And we all see big companies that do this. And this is what the big brands do, right? You hire the best marketing person, you hire the best salesperson, and you spend. And Matt's point is like, well, guess what? You can't do that if you're a startup.
You got to be clever and you got to figure out the exact moment in which they had the pain. They're sitting at the diner, and then you got to go test it, run the experiment, put the ad in the paper.
Yes.
And then hopefully.
And in some ways, we're talking about like 10% of actions lead to 90% of growth. The 80-20 of like Matt's whole process, I think, is like digging into these customer journey and jobs to be done interviews and really figuring out why aren't my customers thinking that life is short and they should just pull the trigger, because I'm putting my message somewhere where they're not thinking life is short. I'm like getting them at a different part of their journey. They're not ready to hire me here. So I'm like blowing all this money, putting ads over here where they're optimistic. They think they're smart and they're thinking that maybe they should like wait till the perfect money situation comes up. Whereas like you just got back from a funeral and you're like, you know what? I'm going to do what I always wanted to do.
Yep.
And I think that there's like a journey for all of our potential clients. Where can your message meet them? It's going to be more affordable and a potential growth lever for your company.
I'm thinking about buying a Corvette. I think I'm at that age. You made me realize life is short.
You got done with the podcast and you call up Chevy. All right. The final piece here is to run growth sprints. So to create a framework in your company where you can quickly iterate and incentivize key team members, or that might be yourself, for actually failing at this stuff and moving fast, like taking a small cohort of customers, testing, getting the data back, and figuring out whether this stuff is going to work. And I think what's interesting is like he gives a lot of studies in the book about people who like act without data or people who over discuss things. There's all these like different methodologies of how teams behave. And he's like, look, we're not looking for good opinions here. We need to like have a solid idea of what's going to grow this company, do it quickly, see the returns, and iterate business. So this is a classic startup methodology, but thinking about how bootstrappers can do this, like I read the book and I just imagine a spreadsheet with like, we are going to map the customer journey. We're going to do jobs to be done interviews. So a team member is going to come back. They will have recorded 15, 20, whatever. If you don't have enough time, 5 interviews. Find 5 great clients, interview them in depth about their psychology. And then now we're going to propose 5 different simple plans. We're going to put them on a spreadsheet and we're going to judge them based on the potential expected return. Now, we are, of course, talking theoretically, like we just read the book. And so we're kind of like talking through this as we're thinking about growth experiments that we could run and like, how do we execute a growth experiment in a business that has a lot of customer delivery going on? If you like the framework, I would just say map out that journey, figure out where your customers live when they're making these decisions, actually call them and ask about that story without asking them why they bought, and then propose some experiments and like just start getting cracking on them. The whole thing for me, I was like, wow, like it is so hard to do growth stuff because it fails all the time. So many of us talk about growth as like just moving out to the next social media platform or the next ad or the next, let's start a YouTube channel or whatever. No, you just need a few gems.
And for me, again, Dan, looking inside of your company is like where all this is coming from.
Yeah.
Right? It's not external. It's not looking at TikTok or Twitter or Facebook or any of these other platforms necessarily. I mean, you might figure out something that works there. You might figure out what your message is from looking internal that you need to put externally out to the world to bring people back into your company.
And what I've noticed is like when listeners of this show, ourselves included, start to map out that journey, it's very empowering because now you can manipulate or start to work on that journey the same way you can hit post on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
If you're getting your clients through personal relationships, don't just like let it sit at personal relationships. Figure out how the relationships come about. Figure out what is so hard about making personal relationships and then start to take away the constraints so you can get the volume going.
Yep.
All right. So one final thing before we wrap up here is he does mention some common pitfalls here. He basically calls like channel marketing table stakes. Just posting on whatever table stakes. We want to find these true growth levers, and they're found through like customer insights. Picking the wrong North Star. So like the common thread there is like, look, your revenue doesn't equal value alignment. In his case, startups need strong value alignment because at least for a startup, like your value proposition has to be like dimensionally different than your competition. That doesn't always need to be the case for bootstrappers, but it's interesting to reflect on. And then finally, over delegating this process to hires, especially like with former company experience, like this is the roadmap from wherever I came from. And then all of these people with former experience, they basically put a resource strain on your company because they all want to do the thing that they did at the last company. It's expensive. So this is a classic kind of like startup mistake, not as prevalent in bootstrappers, but I do think the idea that you're just going to like drop this on somebody's desk, probably not the way to proceed.
A bootstrapper would do that. They would hire somebody for a couple $1,000s a month, right? That was like running some experiments at some other company, and they would bring them into their company and hope that it works. Yeah.
Maybe this is too big of an opportunity to allow yourself to do this,
100%.
right?
Yeah. And again, this is why you're getting freed up from your operations, hopefully, to be able to run these experiments.
I think that's it. It's time for us to maybe take a stroll around the lovely city of Barcelona.
You know, we've been here for like almost 2 weeks, and I can count on 2 fingers how many times I've had some Bravos. So I got a plan. It's sad that I know what that number is, but I got a plan, man.
I hope this one was interesting to hear me and Ian kind of work through these ideas ourselves. We're just encountering this concept, thinking through this idea and what it might mean for us, this idea between growth and optimization. Often people say they're doing growth things when really what they're doing is optimizing, and does making a distinction between the two things empower people to take more, quote, risks. If you're curious about the operational stuff we talked at the top, we've posted in detail frameworks, worksheets, a whole video going through this for an hour. You can check it out at tropicalmba.com/resources. And you can download all of them for free, no opt-in required.
All right, let's go get those Bravos.
All right.
See ya.
Become a Tropical MBA insider today at tropicalmba.com. It's 100% free. You'll get access to some of our best business building resources, templates on everything from quarterly plans to budgets, all that, plus a weekly email from yours truly. Join the fun over at tropicalmba.com.